says, the United States' sprawling geography has long encouraged the dispersion of people. But since World War II, we have violently pursued an American dream that has so disconnected us from each other that it is starting to look like an illusion. This is the first paragraph in the article that attracted my attention in the tablet. The article is called, title of the article is Four Lessons for Fragile America. A subtitle, A Jewish Model of Embedded Community Offers Something Unique to an America that Badly Needs It. The author of this article is Seth Kaplan. Seth is a leading expert on the phenomenon that is called fragile states. We'll talk about it. He is a lecturer at Johns Hopkins University and a senior advisor and consultant to many organizations like World Bank, U.S. State Department, U.S. Agency for International Development, and some countries and NGOs. I want to welcome Seth. Seth, welcome to Chicago Jewish Cafe. Bruchim Habayim.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Alexander.
Seth, what is meant by fragile states? What is it?
So fragile states, I wouldn't call the U.S. a fragile state. It's more of a fragile society. But when I use the term fragile states, I'm referring to the roughly 1/3 of the world's countries that have both not enough cohesion and not strong enough institutions to manage the resulting divisions. So they're typically ethnically, religiously, clan, or somehow geographically divided, and these different groups do not because there's a lack of cohesion, they see themselves as different, and yet there's no mechanism for them to cooperate, no mechanism for them to resolve conflict, and the end result is more political instability, more underdevelopment, tends to be a lot more corruption. Policies may make sense on paper, but they don't deliver the results. And these countries are pretty much in vicious cycles. Some of them can incrementally, gradually make progress. A lot of them are the ones we hear in the news that are facing internal conflict. We could give examples. You can think of Sudan. You can think of the big DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. You can think of the problems in the Sahel. You can think of Syria. You can think of Libya. You can think of Yemen. These are all countries that do not have strong institutions nationally and do not have cohesion. So they're basically structurally, politically unstable.
But the subtitle of your book, Fragile Neighborhoods, includes American society in this category. What do you mean?
So I wrote the book because 2015, 2016, around then, I got asked over and over again. I live near Washington. People in Washington know me as the fragile states person. I mean, everybody knows my work that would meet me. I work on political transitions, conflict prevention, but it's all in fragile states. And they would ask me, partly in jest, partly out of anxiety, is America becoming a fragile state? And so I spent several years doing what I do in any country, meeting people, wandering around, trying to see different parts of the country, talking to people, reading books, whatever I thought would help me understand. And again, the book is Fragile Neighborhoods, not Fragile Society, because I think the real thing that makes America fragile as a society, and we have great companies, great technology. Our Constitution has been around for over 2 centuries. We even had an election in the middle of our Civil War, middle of our Depression. I don't think that nationally we are quite like a fragile state, but on a personal basis in our communities, there's been a great change in the nature of our relationships over the last two generations. And so if you went back to 1960, there were a lot of things that weren't great, but for the most part, we lived lives with good relationships and relatively strong communities. And now many things are better. We're materially well off. We have iPhones, we have all this, we have plane travel, everything we didn't have. But on the downside, our relationships are worse. Our disconnects from each other is greater. Our alienation is at like record highs, mistrust the same. And that affects politics. It also affects our health. It also affects things like depression. Lots of things are not doing well on the societal basis or within our society. And I think that all goes to the decline of our relationships and the decline of our neighborhoods. Therefore, the book, Fragile Neighborhoods.
Hmm. And you say, so basically, as I understand, this fragile neighborhood is when people don't talk to their neighbors, don't have anything in common with their neighbors. That's what you mean?
I mean, relationships in the place that you live. It's a book that says place matters. I mean, just look at the data. If you're an American, your lifespan can vary by 40 years depending upon where you live. A more typical difference is 20 years. I mean, I don't know your geography well, but I bet if you looked at the map of greater Chicago or your part of Illinois, and you thought, I looked at county by county, neighborhood by neighborhood, zip code by zip code, you would easily see places that had a 20 or 25-year gap in average lifespan. That's telling you that where you live, your neighborhood matters tremendously for your health, for your well-being, for your social mobility, for your prospects as a person, especially if you're a child. And so when I talk about fragile neighborhoods, it's the decline of our relationships across the board. And in particular, how some neighborhoods, some of them are poor, some of them are not so poor. We are more isolated, more disconnected, and also we have many, many disadvantages because we're more alone and alienated from our surroundings.
Well, I was born in the Soviet Union, and
Where about, Alexander?
I was born in a city called Vinnytsia, which is between Kiev and Odessa.
Yes, I was in Kiev about 3 months ago. So I went from Kiev, I came in from Poland and I left through Kishinev. So I don't know if I passed you on the road. There was an option to take the highway through Odessa, but I took some road through northern Moldova. So maybe I could have gone by your town.
You certainly have. You certainly have. But in any case, we're not going to talk about Vinnytsia right now. We're going to talk about America because the subtitle of your article is that the solution for this fragility of these neighborhoods, which I don't fully understand yet, and we'll talk about it,
We'll go
is
deeper.
yeah, we'll go deeper. Are the Jewish communities? What do you mean?
Well, I think that's a model. The article you referred to is I wrote the book. I wrote the book basically doing my social analysis and my interviewing and talking to lots of people, reading lots of books. And this is where I landed. I didn't think so much about my own faith and my own lifestyle. Again, I'm religious. I live in a religious neighborhood. We have very strong community. But then again, after I wrote the book, and I had to revise it many times, and I reflected more on my own experience and my own life choices. I didn't grow up religious. I grew up in a relatively secular family. In fact, my wife is from Kishinev, former Soviet Union, and she grew up, of course, not religious, as mostly everyone in the Soviet Union was. And yet here we live in this religious neighborhood that's a joy to be in. And you have so many relationships. You may not have lots of friends, but you have relationships, you have a support system, you have a sense of trust and interdependence with people that I think most Americans don't have anymore. So clearly something subconscious or something about my own experience has made me not only professionally write a book on a topic like fragile neighborhoods, but also has personally led me to make life choices that embed me in a strong community. So I think the recipe of my life choices, they're not going to suit most Americans. This is a country of 342 million people, many of them not religious at all, some of them only partially connected to their identity or their history or their religion. But I do think the model that Judaism brings, and I think the model that some Christian churches and other houses of worship or other faiths have to some extent, is this idea of strong place-based community. I believe that's the main answer. The question is, how do you create it in a country where everyone drives, everyone's on their phone, a certain person might move around from place to place a lot and feel no loyalty to neighbors or place? I think that's the big question here.
Very interesting. So, are you advocating a country that is going to be grouped by either religion or ethnicity or language? Or
No, not at all, not at all. I think the secular. I'm not here to. I don't proselytize. I don't tell people how to live. That's definitely not the way I am. And my message is there's a really strong attempt to speak to people on the left and the right. And if you read my book closely, you will see that it borrows ideas from both the left and the right, because I think they both have something important to say. Doesn't mean I agree with all aspects of it. So certainly some of those people are not religious and have no desire to be religion. But I think the idea that place-based community and the ties we have with those around us and strong local institutions are essential for human flourishing, I think that is not very controversial. And so I think as a society, we could do far more to make where we live more clearly structured neighborhoods. We could do far more to ensure that there's local institutions, places to meet, places to have a role in society, places to be a leader, et cetera, in your communities.
Mhm.
People are alienated because our country it used to be that you could have a stake in society and do something about society where you live. Today, because so many things are nationalized or distant, I think a lot of us just feel like we have no stake and we're unhappy with the result. And I think that explains a lot of our anger and alienation at the government, at politics, and everything.
So once again, I'm going to a little bit rephrase my question. Does it mean that you now advocate for Irish to be in Irish neighborhoods, for Italians
No,
to be?
no, no. This is not ethnic. This is the design of the landscape. So, for example, what is a neighborhood? A neighborhood has clear boundaries. A neighborhood has a center. The neighborhood has places to meet, places to shop. It has local institutions. It has
On what
civic
basis? On
institutions.
what holds that neighborhood the way you described together? I mean, where we live in Skokie, there's plenty of it now, but there's estrangement of people one from another.
How many people live in Skokie? How many people live in Skokie?
I don't know, 35,000.
Yeah, so for
Maybe
me,
more. I'm not sure.
yeah, yeah. So for me, again, it has to be human scale. So I live in a neighborhood. I don't know. There's much less than 10,000, but let's say I'm thinking, I don't know, 7,000 to 10,000 people. We
Mhm.
have some restaurants. We have some cafes. We have some parks. We have community schools. We have lots of institutions that you can join. So the problem in most of America
What
is you
percentage
have
of
the
those what percentage of those people in your neighborhood are Jews?
well, so my neighborhood is religious. It's based upon religion. But if you went
Okay.
to a small town someplace, you would find the same thing.
But in
If you
small
went
town,
to
they also organize by religion and by ethnicity.
no, I think that's much more cultural. I've seen this in four different ways. I've seen religion, I've seen culture, which is more towns. I've seen areas, you go to some areas like Chevy Chase near me, or like Park Slope in New York, lots and lots of social activities. People tend to be very progressive on the left, not religious at all. Many ethnic, religious, every background, racial backgrounds, but there's loads and loads of local organizations. And I think the fourth way I've seen it is you're physically cut off a little bit. So I recommend a bit of all those things. I think our neighborhoods should be human size and they should be clearly demarcated. That would be physical. I think if there was local places to meet, like cafes, shops, institutions that we were involved in, like might be a role in governance, a role in deciding planning for your neighborhood. There might be some local ways to contribute to people around you through associations, could be sports associations, whatever it is, that would be more institutional socially. And so you could go through these things and you could think about what do we do to make a society that is, we have more of a vested stake in where we live and who we live with, as opposed to everything being so distant, so far away, so national
Okay, so
or regional.
you're not accepting my question because my question included, the biggest things that bring us together are, first of all, our family, second,
Yes,
religion,
yes,
ethnicity, common language. Now, what I asked you, and then you went on politics and everything else.
yes. Americans will not organize on ethnicity. They could organize on
But
religion.
your neighborhood is organized
Mine
on
is.
ethnicity.
Mine is Christian churches should be much more community place based. So Christians could do it, Jews could do it, the atheists cannot do it. And there's a lot of
And not
atheists.
simply Christian churches, but specific Christian
Yes.
denominations.
It could be. I mean, it should be. I'm not speaking denominations, but I speak to lots of Christian
So
audiences.
when I
And
said
I explained to them they could organize on each church should be more place based, in my opinion.
excellent, excellent. Now, for example, in your Jewish neighborhood, will Italians feel comfortable?
Um, we have I probably about 3/4 of our institutional life is Jewish, but there's certainly a part. I have neighbors that are Black. I have neighbors that are secular, Jewish, non-Jewish, Catholic. I don't think they feel as close to everybody else because they're not part of it, but the norms of how we treat each other, it does extend to other people. I mean, I don't walk by and not say hello. If my kids want to play with the Black kids across the street, they play with the Black kids across the street. It's not something that we don't divide, but they don't come to our synagogue. They don't come to our Shabbat meals and things like that. So I think it extends to them, but it certainly doesn't in many, many areas.
Okay, so the article that I'm referring to, by the way, we're going to append this article to below
Thank you.
the one we're going to put on YouTube. It says Jewish community model, Jewish model of embedded community for America. Could you please elaborate on this? What is the nature of this modeling? Because Jewish community, especially Orthodox Jewish community, is a special case. And once Jews are organized, the other people complain that we are all together too much and we do not allow others in. So now, and the same thing, if Irish will organize, and there's plenty of neighborhoods remaining still, although they're not as much as in 50s, Irish were and Italians and all other ethnic groups, and Jewish kids going through neighborhoods very often were beaten up. So what I'm saying is this organization, according to religion and politics for grown-ups, for whatever, and ethnicity, what is the basis for organizing the neighborhoods, the community in neighborhoods, so it would be not uncomfortable for others, people who are not members of this particular religious group or ethnicity or whatever. What is the lesson for America?
So my book is not about religious groups. It's not about ethnic groups. It's about a secular way of organizing the country and cities. I travel around I was in Tallahassee, I was in Dallas. I'm going to, in fact, I'm going to be in Chicago because Chicago as a city, there are people interested in ensuring that every neighborhood is a flourishing neighborhood. That means that there are no neighborhoods that are high crime, poor schools, weak families, weak interfamily dynamics. But there also are not neighborhoods where everyone is wealthy and nobody knows each other and everyone's isolated from each other. So again, I do believe if you are a church community or a synagogue community or a mosque community, or I guess you could be a Somali community, these are recent immigrants, or a Chinese community or a Mexican community, you can do that in the way I describe it. But for the most part, and I am talking about a more secular view of how we could organize the society such that those that are not a member of one of these religious or ethnic groups, which I think is the great majority of Americans today, because as you mentioned, the Irish were organized in the 50s, but the Irish are not very organized today that way. We need to come up with a secular model that encompasses everybody. And for me, it's about the physical landscape. Everyone actually lives in a clear neighborhood, a human scale. So part of this is urban planning. Part of this is community schools. I mean, I can support, for example, competition in schools, and I can support things to create diversity in schools. But actually, if you think of schools as one of the best mechanisms to build relationships between families, I want to support community schools. Because if my kids walk to a community school or everyone in my neighborhood goes to a community school, they will play with each other more. The families will know each other more. So I'm looking at every part of society, from the physical to the churches, to the schools, to the way we organize shopping, to the way we organize even zoning so that each neighborhood will be multifunctional and not just houses here, shopping here, eating here. We need to do it all together so people locally interact and overlap. Even government, if government is far away, we have no way to engage with it. If government is brought down more to our size so that government is organized around neighborhoods, not organized around housing, not organized around human services and education, those are important. But what would happen if government was organized around neighborhoods? I mean, there's a lot of things you can look at every part of our society and say, if the things were organized around where people lived and people felt they had a way to influence their surroundings, their priorities would be different and we would have better relationships with each other. This is what I'm trying to argue for.
Give me, please, an example because I'm a little bit lost as to what exactly we're
I'll give you an example. The city of Edmonton. The city of Edmonton has several aspects that promotes neighborhoods. They have Edmonton and Alberta in Canada. It's one of the largest cities in the center of Canada. So Edmonton has an office of neighborhoods. This office of neighborhoods main focus is to build across the city block leaders and then neighborhood leaders that ensure social interaction between people where they live. Because we used to do this organically, and it doesn't happen organically, and relationships between people is important, the city actually has a staff of 4 people whose only mission is to intentionally nourish relationships. It happens that the city is organized around neighborhoods from when it was built. It also happens that the city has something called neighborhood federations. I believe there's about 25 neighborhoods that elect officials to work at a level. It's an association, but it's between people and the government. So there's a lot of things that are going on in the neighborhood in these places. The city of Atlanta in the United States They have a whole master plan. The current mayor, who's been in office about 2 years, has a master plan and has a person I know who works on neighborhoods. They have a master plan to make neighborhoods the central element about how they think about the city, to help the neighborhoods that are not doing well do better by integrating all parts of government, and then later to integrate nonprofits, so they're not thinking on the individual basis, they're thinking on the neighborhood basis. Because when you only think about individuals, we tend to help the problems of today. We don't give them the capacity to help themselves tomorrow. But if you make neighborhoods thrive, people have a web of relationships that support them in terms of their future health, their future mobility, everything. We want to have thriving neighborhoods. So the city of Atlanta literally has a master plan to make each neighborhood successful. And so they think about neighborhoods. I mean, I was in Tallahassee last week. I spent many hours just with their neighborhood office, which also has not quite as ambitious, but a plan to make sure every neighborhood was well connected and had local places to meet and have local associations. It's simply a rethinking about how we organize life. In America, we've organized life for 60 years around the individual. And so we've made many, many people materially well off. What would happen if we don't want to give up the growth of our country, because growth is important. I mean, I'm a big believer in economic growth. But what would happen if we focus more of our energy on ensuring we all lived with robust relationships in a socially thriving neighborhood? It would mean different priorities for a lot of things that we do. This is what I'm talking about.
But don't people themselves organize like this according
In
to...
the past, this would happen organically. If you go back, there's actually a great book about neighborhoods in Chicago written by a man named Alan Earhart. He wrote this book about 25 years ago. And he wrote in the 1950s, the communities were really strong. He gave 3 neighborhoods, 1 black, 1 in the suburbs. It was 2 white, 1 maybe more downtown and 1 in the suburbs. Don't ask me the 3 neighborhoods, but I bet if I rattled them off, you would know who they were. It's called the Lost City. And then he says by the 1990s, because of changes in how we work, changes in how we shop, changes in how we volunteer our time, all these different things about our lives, basically the streets were deserts. People did not know each other. And so all of this was gone. This is even pre-smartphone and for the most part pre-internet, and everything is much worse. But he laments what was lost because people's lives are much more alienating and disconnected from each other. And community was something that people treasured. And the big question is, what do you do? So this used to be organic. For me, we have to actually be more intentional today.
Mm.
In my neighborhood, it is organic because we have religion makes it organic. Most people cannot do it that way.
Well, according to you, most people don't want to do it that way because
I think this idea of want, I mean, I don't want to be poor, but if I live in a terribly poor neighborhood and I grew up and my family is not good, that's not really a choice of mine. In the same way, I mean, I lived in Brooklyn. I was religious in Brooklyn, and I didn't have a lot of good relationships because Brooklyn was so many different Jewish people, actually, so many different synagogues. People didn't actually appreciate each other very much. So it wasn't only that religion mattered. In my neighborhood, because we're compact, we're a relatively human scale, the relationships are great. I lived in Brooklyn. There was many, many more religious Jewish people, and I didn't think the relationships were very good at all. So it's not only religion, you need other dimensions to matter. And then it's where you are should matter the most. But if it's built into society, I mean, I think we are more likely to get it than if we just ask each person, try harder. I'm not a believer that each of us will try harder. It becomes a collective action failure.
Mm. Okay. Now, we're Jewish cafe, so the issue of Jews for us, the most important. You talk about, people, organizing in communities. From my point of view, people have the right and the ability to organize any way they want as long as they don't harm others, and it's up to them. uh, my question to you is, um, right now, you live in Orthodox community. Orthodoxy is about what, 10% of American Jews. Now the
Yes,
other
but
Jews,
rising rapidly, but about 10 to 15%.
yeah, and most of Jews, 90% of Jews, live not necessarily in Jewish neighborhoods. Many do in nominally Jewish neighborhoods. Most of them don't, and they live in other neighborhoods. So my question to you is, what? Let's say that they want to live not in fragile neighborhood, but in what is the opposite of fragile neighborhood? In
I
your
mean, for me, a healthy, strong neighborhood
Mm.
is a neighborhood thick with relationships. I mean, for example, again, you don't need to be religious. There are places where, for example, there's loads of local institutions. Again, I mentioned Park Slope in New York. Park Slope is it's a wealthy, it's probably more white than anything, not so Jewish. And I mean, there is some diversity, but the diversity is not on the religious level. There's very few Orthodox Jews there, and it's socially thriving, and lots of local nonprofits and organizations. And so, I mean, again, this is not only about religion. It can be achieved in many ways, but I do believe because we've lost so many of these local associations. I mean, this country used to be blanketed by, everything
But
from
what
the
is good
Veterans
about the
Association.
neighborhood that you just described for me as a Jew? What's so good about it?
So that's not about Jewish. I mean, there is a synagogue there, but the point is, I'm explaining that it's not. You don't have to be religious. If you aren't so religious, I mean, the thing is, if you
I'm not.
belong
I'm
to a
not as
synagogue,
religious as you are.
yes. So ideally, you belong to a synagogue that values community.
Mhm.
If you belong to a synagogue that values community, if you're not religious, does your synagogue meet? Do people come regularly? Do you have activities? I mean, in my community, there's stuff happening every single day. There's lots of everything. There's parents groups. There's like
So
giveaway
basically, you say
groups.
to feel the
You
community, you need to belong to a synagogue.
you don't have to, but you need to belong to institutions.
Okay.
So
So
the thing is,
basically,
can you belong to a Jewish institution? I mean, you could belong to the Jewish Community Center and do lots of things around a Jewish community center. And if you were there active enough, maybe you would get some sense of community. I
nobody
mean, a
really
synagogue
belongs.
helps.
Nobody really belongs today to Jewish community centers. So there's no.
Well, you do write an annual check saying you're a member, but it's not the same. So the main body is you belong to a synagogue and you're deeply involved and you meet the same people often, and then that forms something like a community.
I have a big problem with your advocacy of these non-fragile neighborhoods because it takes me constantly back to religion focused or ethnicity focused and separated, segregated neighborhoods, race segregated, on and on and on and on. Now, you say that the neighborhoods can do this and this and this in order to bring people together. Edmonton, you give as an example. There's a lot of Chinese there, right?
Nope, that's Vancouver. In fact, I've said nothing about advocating. I mean, again, most people will not live in ethnic and racial segregation. That is not what I'm advocating for at
But the
all.
last neighborhood
And
you talked about, you said it's largely white and rich.
that's because it's very expensive to live there, and they're very liberal. So
Yeah,
that's the
so
type of people
so
you attract. But
it's
there's nothing that keeps other people out. Believe me, if you're in Atlanta,
other than the
they
lack
have
of other than the lack of money.
yes, it's not, there's no segregation here. I am not saying anything. You're the one who keeps putting ethnicity and religion on the table. I haven't said one thing
Because
in my book.
it normally comes from the understanding of this neighborhood needs
Not
to be.
my book is a I mean, again, I travel to cities all across the United States. No one is interested. In fact, one of the main priorities of many governments is how do you reduce the disadvantage of what were previously red line neighborhoods? So they are using these ideas to lift up the neighborhoods that were previously segregated. That's actually one of the main parts of my work. And that's got nothing to do with segregation. That's reducing the effects of segregation. So I have to say, this is what you're implying in my work, but it has very little to do with what my work is
It's not
about.
what I'm implying. This is what your article says. A Jewish model for the community. And Jewish
Yes,
model,
but if
Jewish
you read
model
my,
for the
excuse
community
me,
means
if
segregation.
you, no, I'm saying, did you read my article? My articles are what can we learn from the way embedded community in the Jewish idea works? What can we learn for that can be applied across the country to every neighborhood? That is what the article is about. The article is not telling,
Yeah.
Tablet, trust me, Tablet would not publish something arguing for segregation. Trust me, I know the people who work there. The article is about this is a model that works, that we do not have social problems, and many places do. We do not have loneliness the way other places do. What can we learn from this model that can be applied to secular non-Jewish neighborhoods? That is what I'm writing about here.
The way from your article, what I learned is that the secular should stop being secular and become some kind of a religious community.
That's not what I'm arguing at all. Believe me, when I go around talking to city officials, we're not talking about religion at all. This is not the point. I've written for Christian magazines telling them how churches could be more. I'm arguing
But this
here.
is the same
but
thing.
I've written,
I did
but
not
I've
say
written,
that
Bloomberg publishes all my book. Bloomberg publishes. People write about this book all over the place. Nobody is talking about religion except in the way that you are, except the way you are talking about it. I'm not here to proselytize or tell anyone to be religious.
I'm not saying that you're trying to proselytize. What I'm saying is that I have a problem with the subtitle of your article. The Jewish model is a model for other communities to follow.
Yes, that they should have thicker relationships at the neighborhood level. That is the model.
But you cannot
It
bring
is not about
secular Jews in the same way together as the Orthodox Jews come together. You simply can't.
Okay. I'm just telling you that people all over the country recognize that we are greatly disconnected today, and neighborhoods is the best way for people to be closer together. Churches can play a role, YMCAs can play a role, the neighborhood retailers can play a role, cafes can play a role, schools can play a role, civic associations can play a role, parks can play a role, governments can play a role. All these things can play a role. If you walk around most of suburban life in America, there's loads of houses. What brings the people together? What would happen if the urban planners, there's a whole movement, Congress for New Urbanism, its whole thing is built with tens of thousands of people. How do we rethink the landscape so there will be better social relationships? That is a completely secular model about rethinking how we build out our roads and our streets and our neighborhoods so people are closer together. There's no religion in it. That's simply one aspect of a much bigger picture here.
Can you give me this? We have to finish it, but can you give me one example where your advice to a given community worked out and the community as a result started to live better?
I mean, I could just give you the example. It's recent. Again, the book came out a few months ago, but I spent last week in Tallahassee. I give a big talk in Tallahassee. So I spoke to the people who are running the neighborhood operation, and we have a very long talk about what they're doing. Now, most people who work in government, their main focus is very vertical. What services can I do for you, the citizen? And so as a government official, they think the only way to help people is to give them things. And my argument to them, which now they have to go back and think about and see how they can adapt in terms of usefulness, is that the real focus of a neighborhood office should be in what can you do to nurture better relationships among people so that they are more empowered to help themselves. If we only think of government as a service deliverer, that's a very individualistic way of thinking about things, and it makes everyone think is that they have a need. So just as an example, for them, they should think horizontal, and they should think about how they can nurture more bonding social ties so that people are more capable of helping themselves. And that's the kind of message that resonates in many places.
Well, I'm all for people coming together and living better and knowing their neighbors. I do not know if I decided on things, but um, I'm for freedom of association. And the freedom of association depends on many factors, and the desire to associate depends on many factors. The issue you brought up, that is in America, and there is estrangement and alienation of people from one another. But my feeling is that the only way that people come together is through religion, ethnic association, and political association. I do not see any other way of for people to get together.
I think that's a very, very 21st century narrow view of how people come together. I believe that place itself brings people together. And if places are structured properly, we will know our neighbors and we will have more commitment to each other, and people will be happier, and their lives will be better. And I don't think that's that. And I purposely engage like that consistently on a non-religious, non-political, non-ethnic manner with all types of people. There's no signs on my car. There's no signs on my lawn. And I invite people to visit me, just whatever their background is. That is a good neighbor. That is what people should be thinking to do.
It seems like you're a good person. I do not know if anybody is going to move into your neighborhood and to establish the community. But in any case, I think that you brought up a very important issue, that is the fragility of relations in this country between people. And something needs to be done. And because some of the trends that I observe lead this society to such a fragmentation and segmentation that it may result eventually in civil war again.
I don't think we'll have violence on that scale, but I do think a lot of things will not be well for people in the country if we don't become closer to each other and have better social ties and more trust. And I think it all starts with our relationships with people around us.
Well, sounds good. I hope that people read your book and think about the issue and maybe come up with some answers similar to yours or some other answers. Seth, thank you very much for stopping by, and I wish you the very best.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexander. Thank you for doing this, and please take care. Best to you and your neighbors and your family.
Yeah, as they say in China, sei gesund.
Yes, thank you. My mother says that often, but thank you so much then. All right, take care. Have a good day then. Be well. Bye-bye. Cheers. Bye-bye.